Yeah, if you are ready, please go ahead. You can start. Ikramullah.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, I'd like to thank you all for joining us today. My name is Ikram Al-Ahmad. I'm currently a student of Masters by Research in Chaldeans University. Now, as Dr. Hakan mentioned earlier, the topic is obviously a very controversial one, but more importantly, it's very contemporary because it relates to a great number of Muslims in Australia, but more importantly, all around the world as well. It's a topic which is discussed every year.
Yeah, but mine is
And the topic is basically citing the moon for Ramadan in Islamic law, a critical evaluation of diverse views on calculation and physical sighting. Now, just by the topic, one can basically understand that this has got to do with moon sighting. It's a topic which is controversial. It's a topic which Muslims discuss. In fact, a lot of them, they have disagreements, and to an extent that people even argue with one another on a yearly basis. Now, most of us would know that the month of Ramadan is a special month for Muslims around the world in which they commemorate the revelation of the Qur'an. They abstain from eating and drinking from dawn to sunset. And all of this is to fulfill one very important aspect of worship in Islam, which in essence is a divine command from God. Now, it is also a time of spiritual rejuvenation. It's a time where Muslims, they focus on their piety, on their righteousness. They focus towards getting closer to their God. But despite all of this, even though Ramadan is a time of spirituality, it's a time of holiness, Muslims around the world, they face a huge predicament each year when it comes to determining the commencement and also the termination of Ramadan. Now, the issue of moon sighting is not an issue which is only related to the beginning and ending of Ramadan, because as we know, the Islamic calendar is a lunar calendar and it follows the phases of the moon. So the commencement of each Islamic month, not just a month of Ramadan, but the remaining 11 months is also determined by sighting the moon. Now, this dilemma is only caused simply because of the disagreements or the differences of opinions of the Islamic scholars of the past and also the present. In fact, more importantly, the present on the issue of sighting the moon. But at the same time, the disagreement mostly arises over the month of Ramadan, simply because a lot of the Muslims, they don't really take too much attention to the other month, because as Dr. Hakan was mentioning earlier, everyone at the end of the day wants to begin Ramadan on the same day, and more importantly, they want to terminate Ramadan on the same day, because once we finish the month of Ramadan, there is a day which is known as Eid. It's a day of celebration. It's a day of happiness and joy, where Muslims commemorate the ending of the month of Ramadan. They gather together, they call their families, they have feasts together. Now, if there are differences between families and you see different people celebrating on different days, it obviously causes a little bit of misunity between the community. And this is very, very relevant to people that are living in Australia. Now, if we look at the issue of moon sighting, we can see that in the past, determining the beginning of lunar month was a fairly simple task, or a relatively simple task. But obviously in recent times, due to the advancement in technology and communications, there are now multiple different interpretations of Islamic texts, particularly the texts which are from the traditions of the Prophet. So the moon sighting issue is not only an issue, or it's not only one issue, but it brings with it many other issues. And these issues, they obviously then affect the social civilization of Muslim communities all across the globe. So the disagreement not only affects the scholars, but it's also an issue which affects communities greatly. As far as the objective of this research is concerned, The main or the underlying objective of this research would be to investigate the differences of opinion among Islamic scholars of the past and also the present on the issue of sighting the moon. And sighting the moon only when Ramadan begins, and sighting the moon in order to determine when Ramadan ends. So the in-depth emphasis will only be on Ramadan because, as I mentioned earlier, people tend to pay more attention to the moon sighting of Ramadan more than any of the other months. And after a lot of deliberation on the topic, I found that the differences of opinion on the beginning and ending of Ramadan were not only based on sighting the moon and also the opinion of calculation, but there were many other opinions held by different scholars that are not only followed, but are also implemented by a large group of Muslims around the world. And obviously this agreement then has a major social impact on the Muslim community. And then basically there are 4 methodologies which are used to determine the beginning and conclusion of Ramadan. And in fact, we'll find all 4 of these being followed and implemented in Australia as well. So the first one is local sighting. Now, what does local sighting mean? Basically, this is an opinion formed by some scholars, which not only in Australia, but in other countries as well. They have the opinion where if the moon is sighted locally within their country, they will declare as Ramadan starting the next day, or they will declare that Ramadan has entered by sighting the moon of that country, irrespective of time zone, irrespective of how close neighboring countries may be. Let's say, for example, in Australia, if the moon has been sighted, they will announce Ramadan the next day. Now, whether New Zealand, Fiji, Papua New Guinea, Malaysia, Indonesia, all other countries which are within the same time zone, they will ignore that. And that's an opinion which is held by certain organizations in Australia. The second one is regional sighting. This is also an opinion which is vastly followed. This is the opinion of some scholars where they say we will take countries that are of the same time zone. So if the moon has been sighted in any one of those countries, we will take that sighting and then we will declare the month of Ramadan accordingly. The third opinion is that of global sighting. Now, obviously, as evident from the word itself, global, they follow the opinion that if the moon has been sighted anywhere in the world, irrelevant of time zone, they will take the sighting of that country. Doesn't matter how much the difference is between the two countries. If they're able to communicate with one another and they have affirmation that the moon has been sighted, they will make their decision based on that. And the fourth one, which is obviously a major part of this research, is that of calculation. So the method, the understanding of calculation, or the opinion of calculation, is found on different interpretations of scholars on prophetic texts, and I'll analyze on this further in the upcoming slides. Now, as far as the research questions are concerned, there will be 2 major questions which this research will aim to answer. The first one is, what are the methodological conflicts among Muslim jurists behind moon sighting and calculation? And this will also be divided into 2 sub-questions. A, is it valid to determine the beginning and ending of lunar month through astronomical calculations? So this question will basically be looking to answer if astronomical calculations is a valid opinion, in which way Muslims can then use astronomical data or use calculation as a basis in order to begin and end the month of Ramadan. Or B, is physical moon sighting the only valid opinion of Muslim jurists when determining the beginning and ending of Islamic month? So basically, question number 1 will be highlighting the difference between moon sighting and calculation, and we'll be looking to answer the validity of the 2, particularly that of calculation. Because as I mentioned earlier, the classical scholars, they obviously incline towards physical sighting of the moon due to the lack of resources and technology that was available to them at that time. However, calculation has become an opinion which has developed over the past few years, simply because of the advancement in technology and communication. So 1A will basically be looking to answer if astronomical calculations is a valid enough opinion. Question number 2 is, if the moon is sighted in one country, does it mandate all other countries to follow their sighting? So this question slightly sways away from calculation. It's more focused on sighting, but it will be focusing on global, regional, and local sighting. And this will also be divided into 2 further questions. A, in what ways is global sighting the most accurate method among classical jurists? And B, how can regional or local moon sighting be adopted in order to minimize the disputes around the beginning and ending of Ramadan and Eid? And if we look at both of these questions, we can see that the 4 methodologies which I mentioned previously are covered, because these are the 4 opinions which are vastly followed by Muslims all around the world, irrespective of which country they're living in. Some countries follow local moon sighting, some countries follow regional sighting, some are of the opinion of global sighting, and some are of the opinion of calculation. And these 2 questions will be looking to be answered in this research. Now we move on to the literature review. Now there is indeed rich literature available on moon sighting and its impact on Islamic rituals, ranging from the classical period to the modern period. Now the question is, I've used the word classical a few times. What do we mean by the classical period, and how do we determine the classical period and also the modern period? Now in this research, I've divided the literature into 2. So one would be the literature from the classical period, which basically begins from the time of the Prophet all the way up until the end of the 19th or the beginning of the 20th century. And then the modern era, basically all the resources from the 20th century and above. Now we find that the topic of moon sighting is initially referred to in the Qur'an, as well as the prophetic traditions. And then it's further discussed in classical juristic sources. However, we find that most of the literature on the topic of moon sighting in the classical period are basically chapters in large books. Many of you would know the famous classical book of Islamic jurisprudence, which is Ibn Taymiyyah's Majmu' Fatawa. Now, if we open this book and you were to search for moon sighting, you would not find moon sighting as a topic, but you'll find it under, for example, the chapter of fasting, and there will be a few pages on the topic of moon sighting. And just like that, many books from the classical period, they have chapters in large books wherein the scholars, they discuss the issue of moon sighting. And just like that, we find that the literature is available from the primary sources of Islam, and I'll give examples of these in the next slide. 2 classical juristic sources, and when we say classical juristic sources, this research will only be focusing on the 4 Sunni schools of thought, namely the Hanafi school of thought, the Maliki school of thought, the Shafi'i school of thought, and the Hanbali school of thought. And thirdly, modern scholarly works. So the sighting of the moon will be reviewed separately to calculation. Because if I was to research them together, there's obviously a lot of literature on both of them, but the best way would be to analyze them both separately, because there is a lot more emphasis on sighting the moon in the classical period, whereas the emphasis in the modern period is more on calculation. So then these 2 schools of thoughts will then be compared to cross-analyze.
Ikramullah, I think he has internet problem, just waiting for him. All right, he's, I think, trying to rejoin again. Sorry for any inconvenience. Of course, we cannot control internet. I think he has internet problem, but we are waiting for him to join to connect again.
I can't. What?
Yeah, I think he has internet problem. He disconnected. Still waiting for him to rejoin again.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry for any inconvenience, but I think he's trying to join again. Yeah. Yeah, definitely. We cannot control internet and technology, unfortunately.
Can you hear me?
Yes, Ikramullah.
Yeah, for some reason my laptop just crashed. I have no idea what happened. So I'm just getting the file transferred to this one here.
No problem.
I'll share that with you in just a moment.
All is good. Things happen with internet or technology.
Yeah, it's really strange.
You are trying to upload again, isn't it? Presentation.
Yep.
All right. All right, I think coming. Yes, all right.
All right, so
I think literature review, you can continue with literature review part.
this letting me started, but as long as everyone can see.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
All right, perfect. Unfortunately, I won't be able to expand it, but I believe we were up to here.
No, it is clear. We can see it. No problem.
All right, perfect. All right, so we're discussing the literature review, and yeah, so these were basically the resources, as I was stating earlier, on the literature review. So firstly, they will be taken from the primary sources, which basically is the Qur'an and also the prophetic texts. And there are a great number of prophetic texts in which the scholars have taken their opinions from, whether it's calculation or whether it's to cite the moon. And these prophetic texts will also be analyzed. As far as the juristic sources are concerned, there will be at least 4 to 5 prominent books from each Sunni school of thought which will be further analyzed in order to understand the differences of opinions there are amongst the classical jurists. For example, Al-Ikhtiyar, which was written by Al-Mawsili from the Hanafi school of thought. We also have An-Nawadir wa Ziyadat, which is written by Al-Qayrawani, and this is from the Maliki school of thought. We also have Imam Shafi'i's school of thought, Al-Hawi Al-Kabir, which is written by Al-Mawardi, and from the Hanbali from the Hanbali opinion, we have Al-Mughni, or the school of thought rather, we have Al-Mughni from Ibn Qudama. And these are just a couple of examples from the classical juristic sources. There'll be many other books that are that will be reviewed and also analyzed. And lastly, the modern scholarly works on calculation. And this part will then be divided into two. There will be modern scholarly works on calculation, and there will also be modern scholarly works on physical sighting, because as I mentioned earlier, there is obviously a lot of work written on calculation in the modern period, obviously because of technological advancements and the different interpretations of scholars that we find on calculation. But however, at the same time, we do find that there are a great number of scholars that have also written on the importance of physical sighting, even though they are in the modern period. A couple of examples of these works, Yusuf Qardawi's Al-Hisab Al-Falaki wa Ithbat Awail Al-Shuhur. This is one of the more prominent books from the modern period, which will be analyzed. And also, in fact, one of the most important books on calculation, which has been written in modern era, is Zulfikar Ali Shah's the Astronomical Calculations and Ramadan. And in this book, he basically covers right from the Prophet's period. In fact, the prophetic text, he analyzes these texts based on calculation, and he also presents his own opinion on how calculation is indeed a valid opinion which Muslims should be following in order to commence and terminate the month of Ramadan. But at the same time, in the modern period, we find scholarly works on physical sighting as well, such as Al-Fiqh al-Islam wa Adillatuh, written by Wahb al-Zuhaili, and we also have Hamza Yusuf Caesarean Moonbirth. And these are both books which are written in the modern period. However, they are of the opinion that physical sighting is the only valid opinion in order to begin and end the month of Ramadan. Now that brings us to the gap in literature. So basically, this research will investigate the main disputes revolving moon sighting. It will also cover the conflicts behind these approaches, which are derived primarily from Quranic verses and prophetic texts. And as I stated earlier, that this issue of moon sighting has been mentioned in the Quran as well. There's one verse where Allah says that whoever is present from you. So from a linguistic point of view, just one word in the Quran, which is shahida, has been interpreted many different ways by scholars, through which through which scholars have formed their own opinion. Similarly, there are a great number of prophetic texts through which the scholars of hadith, the scholars of Islamic jurisprudence, the scholars of Islamic of tafsir of Quranic exegesis have understood these prophetic texts in different ways, and they have formed their opinions from these prophetic texts. But the most important thing at the moment is that there is no universal principle or rule that can be followed and implemented to resolve the issue around moon sighting. Because obviously, if there was a universal rule or principle, then we won't be having this discussion. Muslims around the world would be celebrating Eid on the same day. They will be beginning the month of Ramadan on the same day. But because there is no universal principle or rule, and because there is so much disagreement among scholars and so much controversy on the topic of moon sighting, there is always that moment where people are arguing with one another, and it becomes a social issue at the end of the day. Now we move on to the theoretical framework. And the theoretical framework basically for this research will principally revolve around the field of Islamic jurisprudence. And as I stated earlier, that from the Islamic fiqh perspective, we'll be focusing on the four Sunni schools of thoughts. And if we look at the four Sunni schools of thoughts, we will find that predominantly most of the scholars from these schools of thought, they are of the view that that following physical sighting of the moon is the only valid opinion. However, from one perspective of the Shafi'i madhab, of the Shafi'i school of thought, we find that there is an opinion which is then validated by more modern scholars, which allows leniency in this, where calculation can be adopted. So this research will be basically look into this opinion as well as the other opinions there are. And secondly, it will also consider the framework of classical Islamic fiqh in the research on moon sighting, according to all four Sunni schools of thoughts. As far as the methodology is concerned, the methodology will basically be a qualitative textual research, in which firstly there will be a concise study of selected relevant Quranic verses, and then these Quranic verses will then be looked at by different interpretations, by different scholars of Quranic exegesis, and understand how they have interpreted these verses based on their understanding from a linguistic point of view, and also from a Shari'i perspective, from an Islamic law perspective as well. And then there will secondly be an in-depth analysis of prophetic texts, and this is where predominantly most of the issue of moon sighting is found, and they are derived from prophetic texts, and not just the books of hadith, but also the books of explanation of hadith, which we call shuruh al-hadith. And thirdly, selected major relevant texts from classical and modern scholars will also be examined, and I've already given a few examples of these in the previous slides. And lastly, we have the chapter outline. So this is roughly where I'm looking at finishing the chapters one by one. This is not the updated one. I had a fourth chapter, but unfortunately, due to the laptop crashing, I wasn't able to get that one. But the first chapter will basically be the introduction, significance, and Islamic perspective on moon sighting. And this I'm hoping to finish by mid this year, hopefully June, July this year. Chapter 2 will be covering moon sighting in the classical sources and also literature. And this chapter I'm hoping to finish by the end of this year. And chapter 3 will be moon sighting in the modern period, which I'm aiming to complete by mid next year, and chapter 4, which will basically be the conclusion and the summary, by towards the end of 2022. So that brings me to the end of the presentation. I do once again apologize of the disruption which happened in between. Obviously put me off a bit because I had my notes on it, and the last few slides I couldn't really reflect on them, but there was one more slide after this, which was a thank you slide, and also if there were any questions you can ask.
Ikramullah, thank you so much. This is okay. Things happen sometimes because of internet. It is okay. All good. Thank you for this beautiful presentation. Now we have discussions session, right? Q&A session. Do you have any questions to Ikramullah before Associate Professor Salim Ferrer and Salih yourself? Do you have any questions to Ikramullah? Just you can raise your hand and you can speak, or maybe you can type on chat box, just questions, please. Yeah, questions. Yes.
Ask a question.
Yeah, the Sadiq, before you, maybe we should start Imad and Mashid, maybe in order. Yes, Imad, just if you ask your question, then after that, Sister Mashid, then Sadiq. Yes.
Hello, my name's Imad. I don't know if you can see me.
Yes, I can see you.
I can see you, yes.
Okay, my name's Imad. I'm currently in Bangladesh, but I'm from the UK, and I work at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. We run a program there called the Astronomy and Islam program, and I'm about to begin a PhD at Cambridge University on the topic of the Islamic calendar in the UK. So not a Islamic jurisprudential approach as you're taking, but more of a historical and anthropological approach as to how Muslims in the UK have engaged in the topic of the Islamic calendar and moon sighting. So first, I just wanted to introduce myself because I have a great interest in your research. I'm looking forward to it coming out.
Thank you.
I have a question. If I just give you 30 seconds about what I'm doing in the UK with a group of people, because I've seen your website, Moon Sighting Australia, and what you've achieved in creating like moon sighting panels around the country. In the UK right now, we have a very similar dispute between different groups who have different perspectives. I have a question about women and women sighting the moon, because one of the things we practically come across in the UK is we have many female sighters. We have mothers who go out with their children and they sight the moon. And we've had occasions, I had an occasion for the month of Rajab where I had a single woman from her house see the moon. She live streamed the moon to me. She took pictures of the moon. And I had kind of Islamic scholars phoning me up and say, well, we don't accept the testimony of women, or the testimony of women is we need to have 2 women for this to be accepted. And I was like, I was phoning her up. I was doing this live stream. I felt embarrassed, if I'm honest with you, because I felt like I can see the moon. She can show me the moon. We're live streaming the moon. She's taking pictures of the moon. And we have people saying, well, you know, we can't accept the moon because she's a woman. And as I researched the topic more, it appears that the Hanafis accept women, but actually Shafis and others do not accept women. So I've got a question kind of about testimony in your understanding of Islamic law, which is women. Are there more opinions about women testifying that they can see the moon? And I'd be interested outside of the month of Ramadan as well, because I've found some opinions which allow for women to sight the moon for Ramadan, but not, I find it a bit more strict outside of Ramadan. So my 2 questions are women testifying, and 2, what are the different opinions that you found about, or what does it mean to testify or outside of the month of Ramadan, Muharram, Safar, Rabiul Awwal, and so on?
Thank you, Imam. Thank you. Yes, Ikramullah, please. Do you have any?
Thank you, Ahmed. Firstly, really excited to see what you come up with as well, because obviously our topics are sort of related. As you mentioned, you're more on the astronomical side of things. I'm looking at more from an Islamic jurisprudence perspective. However, while I was doing my literature review, I did come across this, and just by the 4 or 5 books from each school of thought, they had lengthy discussions on women sighting. But there is one thing which we found, or which I found while I was doing the research, was that each madhab had different opinions in terms of the number of women. And as you mentioned, there is a bit more strict when it comes to the month of Ramadan and outside the month of Ramadan. I haven't gone into detail in terms of exactly how many you need. Like you mentioned earlier, that many of the brothers, they were saying that you need 2 women, which is true, but there is a lot more to it than that, and that's something which I'm definitely going to be covering in my research. But just adding on that, there are scholars which kind of take you away from the sighting path, and they go more towards something called Imkanu Ru'ya, and that basically means the possibility of sighting. And once that comes in, they say it's irrelevant in terms of how many women there are when that possibility is there. But when it comes to just physically sighting the moon, there are differences of opinion even within the 4 Sunni schools of thoughts in terms of the number, how many there should be, you know, if there's 1 woman or if there's 2 women. And in fact, even at the beginning of Ramadan, some say the number is different at the beginning, and and the same madhab says the number is different at the end. But as of now, I can't tell you exactly from the top of my memory what each madhab stipulates in terms of the number, but there are some madhahib which say yes, it is permissible for women to sight the moon, but there are some conditions that come with it as well. And your second question was, sorry, what was it again?
It was about testimony I think you've kind of answered it outside of Ramadan, because
right, okay, yeah, the focus is more on Ramadan, simply because it's a communal obligation where Muslims, you know, are required to fast from dawn to sunset and everything that goes with it, and more importantly, the termination of Ramadan, where we celebrate Eid.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Imam.
No problem. Thank you.
Meshid now, Sister Meshid, please.
Yes, firstly, thank you, Ikramullah, and congratulations. This is Meshid. It's wonderful to see you present and come for the research question to come this far. I'm sorry I did miss a lot of your presentation, and there was an interruption when I joined as well.
Right, okay.
You may have covered this, but is there scope within Islamic usul al-fiqh in the contemporary times to reevaluate the classical position based on the necessity or needs of the modern day, society or living in cities? We have an added situation with technology, excuse my son there, with the satellites now. There's so many lower satellites now in the skies that are polluting even our, normal vision of, our brother Imad might know from the astronomical angle, but even people taking photos, complaining about the white light pollution coming out of these. A lot of countries are putting up their telecommunication satellites. So based on all these new technologies and the urban life and all of that, is there scope within our classical fiqh positions to reevaluate moon sighting in light of these?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I believe there is, even by looking at what Zulfikar Ali Shah has written in his book. But obviously, again, there are two opinions, even when it comes to this. Some scholars, they wholeheartedly reject the notion of science, the notion of calculation, and they take the literature available on moon sighting as it is, without any leeways and without any area where they can basically interpret them differently. But there are scholars, as I mentioned in the literature review, that more from the modern period, that are inclined towards accepting calculation and its validity, and they actually base their opinions from prophetic text. They don't go outside the boundaries, which is very interesting to see, because when we look at calculation and sighting as an issue, a lot of the people are kind of, I wouldn't say uneducated, but they are misled in terms of what calculation is and what physical sighting is. And one of the objectives of this thesis, of this research, is not just so that we can come up with a universal principle where everyone's happy and all of a sudden everyone starts, celebrating Eid on the same day, but it's more to bring awareness on the diversities and the diverse opinions there are on moon sighting and calculation, so people can actually respect both of these opinions and be together. I'll give you one example. There's a friend of mine who I studied with and I currently work with in the Western Grammar School, and he is of the opinion of global sighting. So most of the time his family follows local sighting, so they celebrate Eid on different days. And about probably 10 years ago, every time this would happen, they would come to each other's house and all they're doing is talking about, it's not really moon sighting, it's moon fighting now. And all they're doing is just arguing about moon sighting and why this happened, why that happened, why can't you guys do this, why can't you guys do that. But slowly, within the past few years, they've actually reached a stage where they've accepted each other. They come on the day of Eid for the other person, so they'll come on the second day. They've kind of reached that stage where they're able to understand the issue of sighting and calculation, and move on with it. And that's what we really want. We want the community to really understand the concept of calculation, understand the concept of moon sighting. And obviously, if there is a way forward, we can find a solution that is what everyone's looking for. But there is a possibility that there may not be a solution. But how can we live with that is to respect and understand each other's opinions. And hopefully one day, we can come up with something that everyone is happy with. That's right, Mir Sadiq. Many families are not ready to reach that stage yet, but hopefully one day there will be.
Thank you. Sadiq, finally, just if you have any question, just briefly, just final question. Then after that, if you have any questions, maybe you can type on chat box. Ikramullah can answer. Yes, Sadiq? Brother Sadiq?
No, thank you, Hakan Hojam. I realize that this is a very passionate topic and it can go on. And I really appreciated Sheikh Ikram's presentation. Next time, inshallah.
Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Sadiq Hojam. All right. Thank you. If you have any further comments, questions, or maybe reflections, you can type on chat box and Ikramullah, can respond to your questions, maybe reflections.
Oh.
Now, just sorry, Imad, we need to finalize because of the time. You can type on chat box. Now, I would like to get some general feedback from Associate Professor Salim Ferrar, then after that, Associate Professor Salih Yüzel. Professor Farah, if you are available, please, it will be good to listen to you and your constructive feedback and reflections, or any questions to Ikramullah.
Professor Salim is muted at the moment, so we cannot move.
Can you hear me now?
Yes,
Yep.
Professor Farah, yes, I can hear you.
Assalamu alaikum. I apologize for muting myself.
No problem.
Let me first of all say very well done to Ikramullah. It's a very thorough and engaging analysis. I think you've done very well. I think there are a few things which one needs to address with this, which is firstly, maybe we need to clarify what is significant about this particular thesis in terms of what's the contribution, because there's been so much written on this. So I think that needs to be clarified further. I think also what I would also like is maybe a bit more. Again, I apologize, I missed your presentation. I've read the literature review. I would have liked to have seen some theoretical framework. And so my question, I think I have a question for you, which is how do you collect and gather all of these opinions together? So what is your analytical framework? So that wasn't very clear to me.
Right. Okay. So basically, the framework was basically revolves principally around the field of Islamic jurisprudence based on the four Sunni schools of thought, and that's predominantly what it would be around. We're not really going away from this, and that's why the theoretical framework, I guess, was a little bit shorter than expected. But I'm trying to stay within the boundaries of Islamic jurisprudence and not going away from them. And obviously, while staying within these boundaries, we are limited to a lot of physical citing only opinions. But once that has been completed, when we move on to the modern period, then we go outside these boundaries slightly, because the modern scholars, they don't really take on the classical text too much. They don't go back to, like, for example, the Hanafi opinion. There is one opinion of the Shafi'i madhab which is referred to in the modern modern books or the modern resources on moon sighting, which is As-Subki's Fatawa, but predominantly their interpretations on the prophetic texts are very different from the classical period. So these are the two main areas from the theoretical framework perspective, which I'll be looking at, just the four Sunni schools of thought, and also the interpretations of the scholars that take calculation as a valid opinion.
I understand that, but I think the problem is it's descriptive. So maybe we need to get beyond the descriptive in order to put all of these opinions together into a frame. So what's your argument? That this is my thing. Whenever we've got a thesis, be it a PhD or a master's thesis, we need to have a very clear argument.
Right, okay.
And I'm not sure what your argument is because there isn't any theoretical frame. Now, if I were to look at what's shouting at me from your pages, I would say there's the issue of reasoning and a sort of fiqh and the approach to the sources. What are the different approaches of these scholars to the source materials? So you've just been stating the ahkam and their rulings, but what are the reasonings behind all this? And can we grab all of these together and put them in typologies? And then what's your argument at the end of the day? So I think that's what I would like to see. And I can't see that yet. Now, one thing I might throw at you is that we have fiqh and fact.
Yeah.
Fiqh and fact. And this is an issue which is not just about moon sighting. It's a much, much broader issue. You can apply to the Qibla as well. There have been some big issues here at fiqh and fact. So I think you'll find those who are looking at calculation tend to go more towards the factual approach, or what they believe to be fact. And those who are operating within the schools, the classical tradition, are going on the fiqh approach. So are these diametrically opposed, or can they be harmonized? This is something I think you need to think about. So that's, I think, one issue which you need to deal with, I would say. If I don't mind, can I come back to Subki's fatwa?
Yep.
Now, I notice you haven't looked at al-Baghawi and Tahdhib by al-Baghawi, which gives further details and explanations of Subki and this issue about calculation and the rulings on this, and that he provides further clarification of what they were doing. And he says it's about ijtihad and that person's ijtihad. So he can rely on it, but no one else. Exactly. So that's mentioned by al-Baghawi. And this is, again, giving further explanations of the Shafi'i rulings. So in effect, there are no contradictions. And so what you're mentioning, or what the modernists are mentioning with regard to calculation and saying this is a variant opinion, actually has already been reconciled within the school. So I think maybe there's a bit more research needs to be put in there.
Professor Farah, thank you so much for this general feedback. We will continue after this discussion session. Ikramullah, do you wanna, if you want to respond to Farah, then after that we will listen to Professor Yusuf. There were two questions, your argument, and second one is Baghawi Tahdhib in relation to Subki. Just briefly, if you would like to respond. Yes.
Yep. No, absolutely. Your point is very valid. I think there is a lot of room for improvement from the theoretical perspective. I guess the main question what we're looking to answer here is it valid to determine the beginning and termination of Ramadan through calculations? I guess that's what it pretty much comes down to, because everyone generally accepts sighting of the moon as an opinion, but the real question is calculation valid? Because if it was, then obviously we don't have an issue, everyone's happy. But because there are a lot of scholars which go against it, and that's where the main issue comes. As far as the fatwa of a Subki, I think I may have touched upon it in the literature review, but that is definitely an area which I'm looking to explore in the research in order to analyze it, and then how it kind of transforms from within the classical period all the way until the modern period.
Yeah,
right. Thank you.
That's a good point, and I think that's something we could talk about a bit later.
Yes.
I want to go over with you.
Farah, we will continue. Thank you so much. Because of time, because we will have a second presentation within a few minutes. Yes, Assistant Professor Yusuf, please, you can provide your feedback.
Well, first of all, Ikramullah, thank you so much for such a well-written proposal. I really like the literature review that you used primary sources, secondary sources from past to the present and in details. And also I would like to say that what Professor Farah said, I concur with his idea as well. So I like really your grammatical analysis, of the words in the hadith or in the Quran by the scholars. I like the four schools perspective that you analyzed, and you analyze almost primary sources or secondary sources to a certain extent. However, I have also a question. Number one, what are you going to contribute to the field, which is going to be new? The first question. And second question, are going to contextualize in Australian contexts? Because whatever you said has already been discussed. There's a lot of literature, books, articles are available from the early period till the modern period. So are you going to discuss in the issue in Australian context?
Yeah, so firstly, in fact, I'll answer that one first. I wanted to focus on moon sighting in general, but slowly go more deeper within the Australian context, because I think, as Brother Ahmed was mentioning earlier as well, they have a similar issue in the UK. And basically, I mean, we can comfortably summarize that this is an issue which is highly relevant to Muslims that live in Western countries, because obviously those that are living in Muslim countries, they are governed by, religious authorities. I lived in Malaysia for 6 years as well. And over there, the king announces it and everyone follows. No one questions, where was it cited, or, how is it possible? There's no questioning there. It's just, we listen and we obey. But when we go to Western countries, obviously there's no such religious authority. And that's why people, they follow what they want to follow. And that's why the focus will be primarily in Western countries, which obviously then includes Australia as well. But I'm looking at researching further in Australia, because obviously it's relevant to all of us. And I think there are more organizations in Australia. In fact, I mean, we've seen times where people are celebrating Eid or, beginning Ramadan on 3 different days. I don't think that really happens in many other countries. So we've reached that level as well. So there's more diverse opinions in Australia, where we find more than any other country. So yes, absolutely, I would want to research further in Australia. As for your first question, what is something new which I'm bringing to this? I think Professor Salim, you also mentioned earlier that, there's already a lot of resources, a lot of literature we find written on moon sighting from the classical period, even in the modern period. But what my objective was to analyze and cross-reference all of these opinions, the classical period, the modern period, the calculation, the local, global, regional sighting, all of that, to see if there is a point in which we can unite all of these, whether it's from as Professor Salim was referring to earlier, from usul fiqh perspective, the fiqh and fact, how we can harmonize all of these and come to a solution. In fact, in our previous meeting with Dr. Hakan and Dr. Suleiman, we were discussing this, and they even mentioned that, look, there is a possibility that there might not even be a solution, but the objective is not to come to a solution. It's more to understand and accept these diverse opinions of the scholars, and so that we can educate the people that these are 2 very well accepted opinions. You are free to follow which you follow. And just want to conclude by saying that a lot of people ask me as well that, how can you, you're going to start doing a thesis on moon sighting. What is your conclusion? How are you going to unite people? And I tell them, I give them the same example. When people come to the mosque and they pray together, you'll see at least 4 or 5 different ways people are praying. I know the example is slightly off, but for the local people, it's just to try to kind of make sense to them that some people are raising their hands in different ways. Some people are putting their hands on their chest, some on their belly button, on the navel, some below, some leave them, some do raf'ul yadayn and whatnot. We don't tell people to stand together in a straight line, pray exactly the same way, because everyone knows that these are all different opinions of scholars in how, we can pray. We don't talk about that, or even other aspects. But when it comes to moon sighting, everyone, obviously, they start, arguing with one another. And I think primarily the reason for this is the lack of understanding and the lack of knowledge that the people have when it comes to this. Because some people just say straight out that moon sighting, calculation is an innovation, it should be rejected. Some say physical sighting is really old, it's for the classical period, we're living in the modern times. So when people have this kind of ideology and belief, it's very difficult for them to understand the core or the root of this issue, and that's what I'm looking to analyze in this research.
All right, Ikramullah, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Ferrer and Yusel. We will continue. Now, this is the first session now finished. Now, we will continue with the second presentation. And second session will be chaired by Associate Professor Mehmet Özal. And second presenter is Dr. Aref Chaker. And he is expert on al-Māturīdī. And Professor Özal will introduce him as well and his original research. And yes, please, Professor Azal.
Yes, just one sec. Okay, good afternoon, everybody. I think Hakan has to split for the additional discussion on the thesis application, so I'm taking over at this point. Now, Dr. Aref Chaker has done a major research on Imam Māturīdī's exegetical work, Tawhīd, which has, to this degree, to this extent, never been studied in English, at least. And he just completed his thesis, and also he's passed also the doctoral examination. He's a doctor now, so he will be presenting one of the key chapters in his thesis to us at this point in time. And Dr. Aref is also a sheikh, a respected sheikh in the community, so he holds both academic hat and a sheikh, not hat, but kufi. And so I'll leave it to Dr. Aref to give us a rundown on his presentation. Aref, are you there?
Yeah. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Can you see me?
Yes.
That's the first time I use.
Ikramullah, can you stop sharing your screen, please? Okay, great. So,
so what do I do?
There's a green button there at the bottom on Zoom. It says share screen. Do you have a PowerPoint presentation?
No, I don't. I'll be presenting orally. I barely made it to the,
Okay.
So
would it be possible for you to show a video yourself?
my camera is open. Should I press start video?
Yeah, just
Does that work?
yes, it does. Yeah,
Okay,
I can see you now. Great.
Excellent. Okay, so I can start, inshallah.
All right. Yes, please go ahead.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, I'll time myself just to make sure that we don't go over time. Okay, Alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyidina Rasulullah. Firstly, I would like to thank you for the invitation and for all the brothers and the sisters who are actually attending. My presentation today is in relation to the theological proofs that Imam Al-Māturīdī, may Allah have mercy upon him, have actually offered or has actually presented in his Ta'wilat, in his tafsir book Ta'wilat. And of course, it is known that the topic of Tawhīd, or probably Islamic monotheism, is the second fundamental topic in the area of ilahiyat and divinity. And I think it's needless to say that that Tawhīd is at the core of the Aqidah in Islam. And any appraisal of the ayat, of the verses of the Qur'an, or the traditional reports of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, or the overall biography of the Rasul Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam testifies to the fact that Tawhīd is the very core of the message of Islam. Of course, in the short time, or in the allocated time for me that I have, we will not be able to discuss the whole concept of Tawhīd as Imam Māturīdī, may Allah have mercy upon him, presents in his Ta'wilat. So what we'll be doing, or what I will be doing, is to assess his commentary in relation to the proofs of Tawhīd. Okay, so we'll be doing that systematically, highlighting his contributions to Sunni theological exegesis, because this is what I focused on. And whilst Imam Māturīdī is always seen in a theological light, what I did and what I would like to focus on is actually his theological commentary in Ta'wilat in comparison to other prominent Sunni and regional exegetes that existed in his era and existed in his time. And therefore, what we'll be doing is highlighting his contributions to Sunni theological tafsir, specifically, and not just to Islamic theology or Sunni theology in general. And therefore, we'll be looking at the commentary of Imam Tabari, Abu Layth al-Samarqandi, Hayashi, Al-Muqatil ibn Sulaiman. These are the key figures that I'll be doing the comparison or the critical comparison between him and them. And of course, at the same time, inshallah, as much time as time permits, we'll be doing a contrast between these theological proofs that relate to Tawhīd in Ta'wilat, and then how Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, he presents them in his Kitab al-Tawhīd. So therefore, we are looking at the issue in an exegetical framework, but also we're doing a comparison between the proofs that are presented in Ta'wilat and the proofs that are presented in Kitab al-Tawhīd. The first thing, and that's what I'm doing, inshallah. That's the direction that I have in my presentation and actually in the chapter. The first thing that I found interesting in the commentary of Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, as far as Tawhīd is concerned, is that he speaks about the obligation of establishing proofs for the conception of Tawhīd. So Imam Maturidi does not see the presentation or the offering of proofs to legitimize the concept of Tawhīd. He does not see it as an academic curiosity. He actually sees it as something that is necessary and something that is fundamental for the da'wah or for the propagation of Islam. And we come across that in his commentary in Surah Al-Baqarah, in chapter Baqarah, in the debate, in relation to the debate that happens between Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and King Nimrod. The ayah 258, أَلَمْ تَرَ إِلَى الَّذِي حَاجَ إِبْرَاهِيمَ فِي رَبِّهِ أَنْ أَتَاهُ اللَّهُ الْمُلْكَ. Have you not considered the one who argued with Ibrahim about his Lord after Allah has given him kingship? In the context of this ayah, Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, he comments on the debate that takes place, and he offers us his opinion. And he infers from the very verse that it is the duty of every believer, every Muslim believer that wants to call non-Muslims to the wahdaniyah of Allah, to the oneness of Allah. He says that it is the duty to provide proofs to establish monotheism. And Imam Maturidi, he stresses that this is something that is important for us to study. It is important for us to study Tawhīd and to study the proofs of Tawhīd before propagating it. And he bases that on the action of Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. He said when Prophet Ibrahim speaks with Namrud, he does not just call him to believe in the concept of Tawhīd, but he actually proves to him the concept of Tawhīd. And that's why he says, فَإِن دَعَوْنَاهُمْ إِلَى ذَلِكَ لَابُدَّ مِنْ أَنْ يَطْلُبُوا مِنَّا الدَّلِيلَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. He says, because if we are going to propagate Tawhīd for them, then they're actually going to demand from us proofs to prove that. وَالْبَيَانُ عَلَيْهِ وَالْوَصْفُ لَهُ كَمَا هُوَ. And we have to clarify to them what Tawhīd is, and we have to accurately describe it to them. And therefore, Imam Maturidi, he says that it must be proven to the people that the concept of Tawhīd and the doctrine of Tawhīd is one that is truthful. He also sees that as part of the obligation of the prophets and the messengers in relation to Islam, and this is the duty of the Anbiya bi-ajma'ihim, because this is the duty of all the messengers and the prophets of Allah to actually establish that. And by Imam Maturidi saying that this is a duty upon the believers and there is a duty upon the prophets and the messengers, that we can deduce from that a number of important or noteworthy points. The first one is that the proofs of Tawhīd then should be readily available in the divine scripture. Because if prophets and messengers are going to speak about the concept of Tawhīd and propagate it, and they are going to provide proofs for that, then their proofs are going to come from the divine scripture itself. And by extension, Imam Maturidi is then suggesting that the Qur'an would contain the requisite proofs for an individual to embrace Tawhīd and to prove Tawhīd as well. And by that statement, or by that implication, Imam Maturidi is highlighting the legitimacy and the importance of theological exegesis. because usually until the era of Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, we can see that the writing in the area of tafsir was not really theological, and that's what makes his work very unique. By him mentioning this point, then he's implying that there is a need for theological exegesis, and that our need to look at tafsir should not stop at just the narrative approach of transmitting the traditional reports. That means that we also have to be involved in a critical analysis or theological analysis of the actual ayat. And therefore, by unearthing the Quranic proofs, we can ascertain the dogma of Tawhīd. And that's why he says this debate that took place shows أنه لا بأس بالتكلم والمناظرة فيه, that there is no harm in us talking about the concept of Tawhīd and debating about it and presenting the hujaj and the muhajja to prove the concept, to prove the doctrine of Tawhīd. When we look at the other exegetes, may Allah have mercy upon them, whether Tabari or Muqatil or other Mufassirin, we find that they did not even comment on this particular ayah in this particular light. We see that they did not really see any relevance between the verse and Tawhīd. They focus on the traditional exegetical reports that transmitted the actual details of what the debate was about between Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam and King Namrud. Even when we look at Samarqandi, may Allah have mercy upon him, he also walks in the same footsteps as Tabari and Muqatil. The only thing that he does is that he comments on the technique in the debate between Prophet Ibrahim and King Namrud, and how it's okay to move from one point to another without needing to establish the first one. So it does not really comment on any on the theological analysis or theological inference that can be taken from the ayah, as Imam Maturidi has done. And the same thing applies to Hayashi. The only thing that Hayashi does is that he provides the same traditional exegetical reports, but from Shia sources. When we continue to Al-Amran, to chapter Al-Amran, we see that Imam Maturidi, again, he corroborates his views that Tawhīd needs to be proven and that we should have proofs to establish the doctrine of Tawhīd. And he presents this in chapter Al-Amran when he actually discusses the delegation of the Christians that came from Najran to visit the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam from Yemen. After the Christian delegation has come to the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, there was the incident of the Mubahala. And therefore he raises the necessity of proofs in the context of the verse of Mubahala, which is verse 61 in Surah Al-Amran. فَمَنْ حَاجَّكَ فِيهِ مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا جَاءَكَ مِنَ الْعِلْمِ. Then whoever argues with you about it after knowledge has come to you. Okay. In the context of the ayah, Imam Maturidi says that the ayah and the incident and the debate that happened between the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, Prophet Muhammad, and the Christian delegation from Najran or from Yemen shows that we do have the need to نوفر الحجة, to show to supply the necessary proofs to establish the doctrine of Tawhīd, particularly when we are addressing non-Muslims. And that's why he says وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ الدُّعَاء إِلَى الْمُبَاهَلَةِ لَا يَكُنْ فِي أَوَّلِ أَحْوَالِ الدَّعْوَةِ. He says that you don't call people to practice mubahala at the initial stages of you propagating and providing Islam to them. And mubahala is basically the concept of standing before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and invoking him to curse or to punish whoever denies the truth after knowing that it is correct. He says وَإِنَّمَا يَكُونُ ذَلِكَ بَعْدَ تَوْفِيرِ الْحُجَّةِ. Okay, the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not resort to that until after an enough space for debate and discussion was actually allowed, وَقَطْعُ الشُّبْهَةِ, okay, and to make sure that you respond to any misconception that can relate to this point, that can relate to this doctrine, and you actually clarify it. Then, so therefore, again, Imam Maturidi, Al-Amran, he establishes or evinces the necessity of establishing and providing proofs for the concept, for the doctrine of Tawhīd. Again, when we do that comparison between him and the other Sunni and the other regional exegetes, we find a massive difference. We see that Tabari, Samarqandi, and Muqatil, what they did, they concentrated on detailing the narrative reports that relate to the discussion between the Rasul ﷺ and the delegation, the Christian delegation from Yemen. They didn't speak about any theological lessons or any theological benefits that they can actually infer from them. And Hayashi, what he does is the same thing. He does not really infer any theological benefits or lessons from the verse. He basically emphasizes the status of the progeny of the Rasul ﷺ, his daughter Fatima and Ali, because they are the individuals that the Rasul ﷺ, he gathered them to practice mubahala. And then Imam Maturidi expands further on this point, which shows how important it is to him. And he says, even if we look at the decisions of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ in general, the decisions of war and peace in his life and in the life of the Muslims, we realize that the Rasul did not take any decisive action against the chiefs of Mecca, did not take any decisive actions against them until after proofs were well articulated and thoroughly discussed, and full aggression and systematic persecution were practiced against the Muslims on the hands of the chiefs of Mecca for years. In Arabic, he says, وَعَلَى ذَلِكَ أَمْرُ الْقِتَالِ أَنَّهُ لَمْ يُوضَعْ فِي أَوَّلِ أَحْوَالِ الْإِرْسَالِ. He said, we noticed that the permission for the Muslims to defend themselves against the chiefs of Mecca who systematically attacked them, persecuted them, exiled the Rasul ﷺ. All this did not take place until tens of years after that, 13 years after that. Why? He said, ليكون, and to give time for the hujjah and for the ayat to be ظاهرة, okay, to allow ample amount of time to be left for the proofs of the concept of Tawhīd and the doctrine of Tawhīd to be well articulated and well presented to them. And therefore, these historical events and the commands of Allah in the Qur'an and the debates that we find in the verses and the decisions of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, all of them, as far as Imam Maturidi is concerned, they testify or they ascertain the fundamentalism of establishing proofs for the concept of Tawhīd. Now, if we cross to Kitab al-Tawhīd, which is the most important title of Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, as far as theology is concerned, we remarkably notice that he does not raise the necessity of proofs to establish Tawhīd. Okay, despite the fact that he discusses the proofs of Tawhīd, he discusses the miracles of the prophets and the messengers, he actually does not really talk about the necessity of providing proofs for the concept of Tawhīd. And that's why this raises the question, did Imam Maturidi rahimahullah think about that he needs to prove or he needs to ascertain that there is a fundamental need to speak about the proofs of Tawhīd before he wrote Kitab al-Tawhīd? Or was that thought something that was presented to him, or he noticed it as he was going through as he was writing his tafsir of the actual Qur'an? And of course, one of the main benefits that we can see from that is that Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, he introduces this particular topic in Sunni exegesis, and he actually provides proofs, or he infers from the verses the necessity or how it is imperative for us to validate Tawhīd and not just call people to believe in it as just as a simple call. Now, and therefore, at the same time, we can see that the other exegetes did not even raise any theological concern in relation to this particular point. And we move on to another question. Like, does Imam Maturidi legitimize the use of rational argumentation in proving Tawhīd? Okay, does he allow for that? When we do of course, in the context of his tafsir, when we do a careful analysis of his commentary in Ta'wilat, we find that he does allow that. Okay, indeed, Imam Maturidi, he argues that the doctrine of Tawhīd is nothing but a normal rational conclusion that the human intellect demands. And what is interesting is that where does he infer this from? Where does he talk about it? He talks about it as part of his understanding of the concept of ma'ruf. And generally, the word ma'ruf is translated as the good actions or the actions that are accepted by people. And we tend to use it in a cultural sense. Imam Maturidi, he does not see it in that sense. He actually sees the ma'ruf as the human intellect accepting the concept of Tawhīd. And he talks about this, he highlights this twice in his tafsir, in his exegesis. He highlights it in the context of verse 27 in chapter Al-Baqarah. And that's a verse that talks about some of the traits of the munafiqeen, the hypocrites in faith, and how they spread corruption. And he also highlights it in the context of verse 67 of chapter Tawbah, which also talks about the actions of the munafiqeen and munafiqat, the males and the females. And in both occasions, Imam Maturidi reiterates the same statement. He says, and they forbid people, meaning the hypocrites, they forbid people from doing the ma'ruf, which the minds accept and praise, and that is the Tawhīd of God. And therefore, Imam Maturidi, he puts Tawhīd as part of the ma'ruf that the minds accept and the minds praise. So he says, يَأْمُرُونَ بِالْمُنْكَرِ, they command people to practice what is rejected, the munkar, وَهُوَ مَا تُنْكِرُهُ الْعُقُولِ, and it is what the minds reject, and that is polytheism. وَيَنْهَوْنَ عَنِ الْمَعْرُوفِ, and they forbid people from doing what is right, and he says, وَهُوَ مَا تَعْرِفُهُ الْعُقُولُ وَتَسْتَحْسِنُهُ, it is what the minds know and where they see as commendable, and that is Tawhīd and Iman in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the fact that Imam Maturidi, in my opinion, repeats that same statement twice in Ta'wilat demonstrates his resolve in this particular understanding, that he sees Tawhīd as something that is rationally commended. And that's why he interprets the ma'ruf there as believing in Tawhīd. And he interprets the munkar as believing in shirk and refusing Tawhīd. And therefore, why would Imam Maturidi rationalize, why would Imam Maturidi legitimize rational proofs? In general today, when we look at rational proofs that are usually used in debates because they are acceptable common grounds between different people from different schools. The use of reason is something that is sort of commonly accepted by everyone. And you would expect that that's why Imam Maturidi would actually legitimize the use of rational proof, the use of reason. But when we look further into Ta'wilat, we see something that is a bit nuanced. In the context of verse 71 of chapter Tawbah, Imam Maturidi overtly confirms that the use of rational proofs is because it is a necessity for Tawhīd. So he says, and they enjoin the ma'ruf that the minds deem obligatory, and that is the belief in the Tawhīd of God. And therefore, Imam Maturidi does not say that we use rational proofs or we should use rational proofs in establishing Tawhīd just because it is something that is commendable or because it is something that is acceptable by different people from different faiths. He says that the use of reason is actually a necessary obligation because reason demands Tawhīd. Reason obligates Tawhīd. يقول فالمعروف الذي توجبه العقول هو التوحيد. So Imam Maturidi, he sees Tawhīd as something that is obligatory and something that is an inescapable conclusion. If you actually use your mind and your reason would ultimately, inevitably lead you to Tawhīd. That's how Imam Maturidi sees that point. And therefore, that shows us that Imam Maturidi sees that there is a link between aql and naql, and he sees there is a link between aql and Tawhīd. And therefore, the use of reason is something that he actually legitimizes, and he sees it as the use of rational proofs, that is something that not only he legitimizes, but he sees it as something that is necessary. Like when we look at the other exegetes that looked at the same verses, whether in the context of chapter Al-Baqarah, Surah Al-Baqarah, or chapter At-Tawbah, or the various verses in Surah At-Tawbah, we see that they don't really comment on this particular element at all, and they don't try to infer any theological benefits from these particular verses. We move on to some of the proofs of Imam Maturidi presents in Ta'wilat in relation to Tawhīd. So what is interesting, we see that at the beginning, he actually talks about the necessity of proofs. And then now we can see some of the proofs that he actually presents. And one of the main challenges that you face when you look at the proofs of Tawhīd or the proofs of Imam Maturidi in general, as far as Ilahiyat is concerned, is that you cannot find it in a designated chapter. You cannot find it under a specific verse. He elicits them as he goes through the tafsir of the actual verses of the Quran. He studies them in different contexts. And therefore, it is always, he's the one that decides what verses to look for. You don't decide for him what verses to look for. So you have to follow him throughout the tafsir and then try to find where he has spoken about the proofs of Tawhīd. And interestingly, the first proof that you come across to prove Tawhīd that Imam Maturidi presents in his tafsir is Anba'ul Ghayb. Okay, the proof of Anba'ul Ghayb, the tales of the unknown past. And Imam Maturidi, he raises this particular proof of argument in a very specific context. He presents it in chapter Al-An'am. And he, rahimahullah, he believes that some chapters of the Quran are they exclusively address Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the scripture, whilst other chapters exclusively address Ahl al-Shirk, the people of polytheism. And here he's referring specifically to the Arab polytheists. He states, most of the verses in chapter Al-Ma'idah were revealed to address Ahl al-Kitab, the people of the scripture. And chapter Al-An'am was revealed to address Ahl al-Shirk, who are the Arab polytheists. And therefore, when Imam Maturidi presents this particular proof, the proof of Anba al-Ghayb, he presents it in the context, he presents it as an exclusive address to the Arab polytheists. So it is not a general proof that applies to everyone that does not believe in Islam. He sees it as something that applies to the Arab polytheists. So he says, rahimahullah, chapter Al-An'am is miraculous as it was revealed to debate the people of polytheism, the Arabs, and affirm Tawhīd and divinity of Allah. And he raises this in the context of verses 76 to 79 of Surah Al-An'am. And he mentions it as one of the main proofs of Tawhīd. The verses 76 to 79 from Surah Al-An'am, just to give a context, are the verses that talk about or that relate to us the discussion or the debate that happens between Prophet Ibrahim and the Chaldeans, who used to worship the sun and the moon and other planets. فَلَمَّا جَنَّ عَلَيْهِ اللَّيْلُ رَأَى كَوْكَبًا. That's the context. When the light has come, he saw a planet. That's what the verses are relating, the discussion that took place between Prophet Ibrahim and the Chaldeans. Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, he asserts that this story is a proof of the truthfulness of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who grew up in Mecca where no one tutored him in these particular tales. So here, Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, he presents the proof of Anba al-Ghayb not as a direct proof that points to Tawhīd, but rather as a proof that points to the truthfulness of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And by proving the truthfulness of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and then you're proving the truthfulness of his message, and the core of the message of the Prophet is Tawhīd, Islamic monotheism. And that's where he says, because the people of Mecca were the people of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and they only can testify for his truthfulness, because they knew the nature of his society, they knew his education, they knew that he never left this region, and they knew that such knowledge, such information was not something that was accessible to the Arabs in the context of the city of Mecca. And therefore, by them knowing that, and then by the Rasul relating to them such a tale or such a discussion from a very long time, then this shows that the source of this information has come from God, has come from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore they should believe in Tawhīd. And that's how Imam Maturidi presents that particular proof, the proof of Anba al-Ghayb, as a proof that points to the truthfulness of the Rasul sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and thereby extension the truthfulness of the creed that he is propagating. But then he moves on further, which is interesting. He moves on further to say that this proof is exclusive to the Arabs, not just because of the fact that they can testify for the truthfulness of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but also because they have a lineage connection between them and Prophet Ibrahim. Okay, and the Arabs, they pride themselves of the lineages, and they see themselves as the descendants of Ismail, who is the son of Ibrahim, and they testify that the Kaaba was built by Prophet Ismail and by Prophet Ibrahim, and therefore the message of Tawhīd for them should be not just a doctrine, it should be a legacy that represents the legacy of the ancestors. Okay, and therefore that's something that they should actually accept. Of course, the first thing that is unique here in the context of tafsir is that the proposition that there are particular chapters that are exclusive to a specific audience is something that is unique to Imam Maturidi rahimahullah. So the other exegetes do not actually raise this particular point or actually infer any theological benefits from these particular verses. When we cross to Kitab al-Tawhīd, we don't find that as well. You know, the discussion of there are exclusive proofs to a specific audience does not appear in Kitab al-Tawhīd. And in Kitab al-Tawhīd, Imam Maturidi does not differentiate between the theological proofs that are addressed to Arab polytheists and the theological proofs that are actually addressed to people from other faiths. And as a result, the proof of Anba al-Ghayb does not appear in Kitab al-Tawhīd. You don't see it. You didn't see it there. And that also raises the possibility of when was Kitab al-Tawhīd written, and why wouldn't Imam Maturidi mention the proof of Anba al-Ghayb there in Kitab al-Tawhīd? That raises the possibility that Tafsir al-Ta'wilat, Kitab al-Ta'wilat, was actually written or at least finalized after. And that is a possibility that I believe in. And one of the things that is noteworthy is that when you look at Kitab al-Tawhīd, you will find that Imam Maturidi does refer to this particular discussion between Prophet Ibrahim and the Chaldeans. So it is not that Imam Maturidi suddenly saw these verses in his tafsir and then he began to talk about it. We see that he does cite the discussion between Prophet Ibrahim and the Chaldeans in Kitab al-Tawhīd twice. He cites them when he talks about seeing Allah on the Day of Judgment. He cites them when he actually has a discussion with Al-Ka'bi. So this particular discussion has been mentioned in Kitab al-Tawhīd, but he never used it as a proof to ascertain the argument of Anba al-Ghayb as he actually presents it in Ta'wilat. Now, of course, another proof, however, in time, good. Another proof that Imam Maturidi, or another argument that Imam Maturidi presents in Ta'wilat is the ease and acceptance of death. The ease and acceptance of death. Of course, before I go any further, before I forget, we also notice here that the argument of Anba al-Ghayb, you know, the fact that the Rasul informed people about the tales of the past nations, is not really a rational proof. Okay, in its nature, it's more of a historical proof. It's a narrative proof that he has taken from the actual Qur'an. Imam Maturidi, he argues that the phenomenon of death could be a proof of Tawhīd, could be a proof of Islamic monotheism. And he does that in the context of verse 185 in chapter Al-Imran. كل نفس ذائقة الموت وإنما توفون أجوركم يوم القيامة. Every soul shall taste death, okay, and you will meet your recompense on the Day of Judgment. There, in the context of the Maturidi, he says the fact that every heart of every creature accepts the phenomenon of death and is in peace with it is a proof that the affairs of all the creatures are to one God. So Imam Maturidi is saying the fact that all creatures accept death, okay, and are in peace with it is indication that the affairs of all these creatures is not in their hands. It's in the hands of one God. And therefore he's saying, he is elaborating, if death was not a fateful end destined by Allah, then every creature, particularly the hukama, and by the hukama, I believe he's referring to the wise and intelligent humans, that would exert the effort in eliminating death from the actual life. He says, but yet they all accept the notion of death, even though it is not a notion that they physically see. He says death is the absence of life. Okay, yet and people have hubb al-hayat, they have the love of life in their hearts. If you were to allow people, no one would choose to actually die. Yet they accept death and they see death as a natural end to all forms of life. And he believes that this stems from the fact that it is beyond the capacity or the choice of all the creatures. It is something that is determined by the Wahid, and that is Allah. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whether we agree or disagree with the remark of Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, we cannot deny that it is a commendable remark, because he does not only see God in beauty and creation, but he also sees God in death and evil, and he seeks to legitimize Tawhīd, not only through the positive or the liked aspects of life, but even by the aspects that we actually hate. And of course that further confirms, and if we take in light everything I said before and what I'm saying now, that further confirms that Imam al-Maturidi, when he was writing Ta'wilat, his aim was not just to write a conventional exegesis. Okay, we can see that systematically, and notice that until now we're just talking within the space of one subject, which is the proofs of Tawhīd. He actually is intending to write theological analysis of the actual verses. He does not just want to write a conventional exegesis. And that's why when I was doing my comparison across all these books of tafsir, you'll see a lot of similarities between them on how they approach every single verse. But when you look at him, you notice that he actually he deliberately highlights and tries to infer theological benefits from any verse that he comes across that he deems relative to the topic of theology, and of course to the topic of Tawhīd. And you could rightfully ask, how does Imam Maturidi see death as a proof of Tawhīd? And here we look at his commentary, and he says that that death is a proof of Tawhīd because the presence of multiple gods, the presence of multiple deities, negates the inevitability of Tawhīd. He says, if there were multiple gods, then death will not be something that is inevitable. When one God may decide the death of one person, another God may deny it and may actually stop it. And if this was the case, then this would lead to irtiyab. It would lead to confusion and chaos in the actual world. Death will no longer be systematic. Okay, so some people will continue to live forever and some people will just die. He says, but when we look at death, we see that death is systematic. We see that death is permanent. And therefore, that's why he actually argues that death is a proof of Tawhīd. And that's why he articulates in his tafsir. Now, when we cross to the other mufassirin, to the other exegetes, we look at Muqatil, we look at Tabari, for example, we see that they saw this ayah as a warning to those who disbelieve in Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that they are inevitably going to face death, and they're going to return to Allah and to God, and Allah is going to hold them accountable. So that's as far as they were able to see from the actual verse. It's just a verse that says that you are going to die, and therefore it's warning you that when you die, you'll go back to Allah and He'll hold you accountable. And Imam Samarqandi the same thing. He says, he makes the same remark, and he says this ayah points to the fact that death is universal. The inhabitants of the heavens will die, and the inhabitants of earth are also going to die. And he stops at this. It does not suggest any correlation between death and Tawhīd. And as for Hayashi, and I don't want to expand on this particular point, he sees this ayah a proof that the Imams are going to return. So he links it to a theological point, which is more related to the Shia, the concept of resurrect, the concept of Raja, the fact that Imams are going to return. So early Imam Maturidi, may Allah have mercy upon him, he actually sees in death a possible argument for the establishment of Tawhīd, or for proving Tawhīd. When we cross to Kitab al-Tawhīd, we don't see that Imam Maturidi presents the proof of death there. It does not appear anywhere in Kitab al-Tawhīd. And that's why Rudolf, if you want to take my word for it, even when Rudolf listed the various proofs of Tawhīd that Imam Maturidi spoke about in Kitab al-Tawhīd, it does not mention the death of proof there. And then also you ask the question, why isn't the proof of death, whether we agree with it or not, whether we find it strong or not, why is the proof of death or the argument of death is not present in Kitab al-Tawhīd, and it is actually present in Ta'wilat? Okay, is it because of the fact that Ta'wilat was finalized after? Why isn't it appearing there? Another proof, and stop me, Brother Mehmet, I'm letting you lead there. Another proof that Imam Maturidi presents in Kitab al-Ta'wilat to ascertain Tawhīd is the proof of Manafi'. the proof of consistency, not only manafa, the proof of consistency and interconnectedness between benefits. Okay, and we come across that recurrently in ta'wilat. So that is a proof, that is an argument that Imam Maturidi raises a lot in ta'wilat. The first instance that we come across is in the context of chapter Al-Baqarah, verses 22. Where Allah says, الَّذِي جَعَلَ لَكُمُ الْأَرْضَ فِرَاشًا وَالسَّمَاءَ بِنَاءً, the one who has made the earth a bed for you. Of course, that's a quick translation. And made the sky a ceiling for you. There, he begins to present the proof of interconnectedness and consistency of benefits. He says, he, meaning Allah, made all of this to us then from his care. He made the benefits of the heavens connected to the benefits of earth, despite the massive distance between them. In order for it to be known that the munshi, okay, the initiator or the creator of the heavens is the very one that created earth. So therefore, Imam Maturidi is saying, his argument is that given the interconnectedness of the benefits of the heavens to the earth, then this should mean that the creator of both must be one.
Dr. Aref, can we make it 5 minutes, please? 5 minutes later, so that we can have some question time.
Okay. Okay. Look, I'll cover from the proof as much as I can. Then, inshallah, stop. Okay. And Imam Maturidi backs this proof, and he shows his rational reasoning. Why should the connection between the benefits of the heavens and the benefits of the earth be a proof of Tawhīd? He says, for if the creator of the heavens was different than the creator of the earth, then there would be no meaning of connecting the benefits of the heavens to earth. And therefore, he believes that polytheism is not realistic, and of course, he does not see it as rational. We already mentioned that before, because of the fact that it is not rational for the benefits of the heavens to be connected to the benefits of the earth. And the point here is, why should the resources that are related to the heavens? And of course, now we're talking. We have to see it from his eyes, and we have to see it from his era. He's saying, why should the resources of the heavens, the stars, the moon, the planet, the sky, why everything that is related to the heavens should be shared with the people of earth if the creator is not one? So he says, first, the realm of the heavens does not benefit anything from the earth. Okay, the sky does not get anything from the earth. The planets do not get anything from the earth. So why should the benefits of the heavens be given to the earth? And he says, second, the large distance between them inhibits any earthly benefit from reaching the actual heavens, from reaching the actual heavens, or the heavenly world, if you want. And here, the main concept I think that Imam Maturidi is highlighting is the reciprocal interest concept. And I think that he took this from his observation of life on earth. The relationship of humans with one another is based on common interests. The relationship between a lot of creatures, whether in the flora or the fauna realms, is related to interest. Okay, particular birds are associated with the crocodiles, for example, because they get some benefit from them. If you watch, I was watching a documentary a couple of days ago. It talks about how the particular type of birds, they actually work together with the dolphins, so they can actually hunt the mackerel fish and then feed upon them. He's saying that usually the mutual benefit and the reciprocal interest is something that is a strong drive that causes creatures to cooperate with one another. He's saying if the creator of the heavens is different than the creator of the earth, why would he share his resources with the creator of the earth if he's not getting anything out of it? And therefore, he's looking at from he's proven it from sort of a universal observation that he sees in the actual in the world. Furthermore, and if you allow me, Brother Ahmed, just to mention this point, inshallah, then stop. He says something else in the context of verse 164 in chapter Al-Baqarah. He says, for the creatures cannot benefit from the benefits of earth except if it is connected to the benefits of the heavens. Here he raises another point. He's saying that if you look at the state of the creatures on the face of the earth, even if they want to benefit from the earth upon which or in which they live, they cannot benefit from it if you separate them from the benefits of the actual heavens. And here what he's talking about is the impact of rain, because he sees rain as a benefit that comes from the heavens. He talks about the impact of the moon. He sees the moon and the change of the seasons as a benefit from the actual heavens. And since I'm running out of time, okay, all these concepts that are connected to the movement of the moon, to the movement of the sun, to the actual stars, to what happens in the sky realm, if you like, from his perspective, he sees all that as benefits that come from the heavens. He's saying, if we look at the state of the species on the face of the earth, if someone was to stop all these benefits that are from the heavens from coming to them, then what will happen? It would lead to their destruction. It would lead to the actual end. And based on that, he says the connection of one, the earth, to the other, the heavens, and its dependence on it proves that the creator is actually one. And here, and that's a common trait with Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, you see vagueness in his writing. He does not expand further on it. But what he's trying to say is that, let's say the creator of the earth was one, and the creator of the heaven is another. That creator of the earth, that created the earth and created all the creatures that live in earth, if he did not provide for them sustenance, if he did not provide for them provision, and he allowed them to depend on the creator of the actual heavens, then that shows that this creator of the earth is weak. He does not know the needs of the creatures that he created. He actually does not care about them, and therefore he's not perfect. And therefore you see that the proof of manafa, the proof of interconnectedness of benefits between both, is also related to how Imam Maturidi sees God. He sees God as omnipotent. He sees God as powerful. He sees God as knowledgeable. He sees God as perfect. And as a result, yeah, he talks about this. Anyway, I'm trying to summarize as much as I can. I'll stop here, inshallah.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aref. I can listen to you all day on this topic. As you know, this is a great a topic, a passion of mine as well. I guess let's give the audience opportunity to ask questions. So would anyone like to ask any question? Or make a comment? You know, it's all welcome.
Yes, I would like to make a comment. It's Masheed. Salaam alaikum, Dr. Aref Chaker. Congratulations. What a wonderful topic. And it's so wonderful to see you complete your thesis and such an important topic. Yeah, this is really inspirational. I think it's we need more works in the classical area. What would be your advice to future researchers who wanting to look into Islamic classical works? What areas do you think we should explore more? Imam Al-Māturīdī is one of those great towering figures, of course, from our classical period that we need to understand in the English-speaking world particularly. What other areas do you think in Islamic theology from our classical scholars we need attention?
That's very difficult to answer, because I think we need to do as much research as we can in all the classical works, because of course I think the result of the gap that has taken place between contemporary research and the classical sources, especially sources within the era of Imam Maturidi, probably this has inhibited us from having a clear picture of how the schools of theology were at this particular stage. I think we need to have a complete review. If we're talking about theology, we need to have a complete review of all the classical sources that relate to this particular period. Any manuscript that gets discovered and offers new knowledge is one that we should actually study, because it would actually enlighten us further about the nature of the opinions of the scholars, or the nature of the theological schools at this particular stage. And one of them is Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, and other scholars that lived within Central Asia. I think the scholars within Central Asia probably unintentionally have been marginalized in research, and I think therefore it's important to go back and to focus on this particular area in the classical works, and anything that is from that particular area should be highlighted. I'll give you an example, like the Tafsir of Hayashi, which is a Shia tafsir. I did not really focus on it. I put it because I included in my research because Rudolph mentions that it's an important book, and also because of the fact that it comes from the same region of Imam Maturidi rahimahullah. But what I find interesting is that how Hayashi wrote his tafsir. I think that's also something that needs to be studied. The narrative approach in writing in tafsir, is it only exclusive to the Sunni school? Has that also been followed in the Shia school, and how did it develop? But really, anything, in my opinion, anything from the classical periods that we can get our hands on that has not been studied, that has not been analyzed, it deserves to be studied, because mashallah, the level of scholarship that you see in the work is actually phenomenal, and it humbles you. Okay, the fact that at the time, with the worldview that they had, were able to contribute as much as they have contributed to Islamic sciences and to humanities.
Okay, Sadiq has a question. Yes, Sheikh Sadiq.
Yeah, I just have one question. Thank you, Sheikh Aref, Dr. Aref. Who do you see was Imam, when Imam Maturidi was writing his tafsir, who was the person he was arguing against in his mind? What type of a reader profile did he have? And in particular, did he also talk about bad ways where rational proofs are used, or extreme ways, for example, the Mu'tazila in mind, or because he seems to be, using everything, even ma'ruf, as you said, as rational proofs. So that's sort of two questions in one. Thank you.
That's a very nice question. When you look at Tafsir Imam Maturidi rahimahullah, one thing in Ta'wilat, and now of course I can only talk within the scope of ilahiyat, within the scope of divinity, and specifically in the area that I looked at, so I cannot generalize that to everything. Firstly, you notice that Imam Maturidi does not really have anyone in mind. At some stage, you don't see him addressing anyone. You see him studying the verses and then inferring from them the theological benefits or theological points that he believes are actually contained within this particular verses. And then other instances, you see him answering, rebutting other theologians. And yeah, the Mu'tazila do actually come up a lot in his work, but they not really come up as much as they come up in Kitab al-Tawhīd. So in instances, he addresses the Ka'bi sometimes, and he addresses others. He addresses dualists and other different faiths. But it's not that he's targeting them. I didn't see in Ta'wilat, I didn't see him targeting people. I felt that in Ta'wilat, what he was doing, and that's why I found Kitab al-Ta'wilat very special in my opinion, is that Imam Maturidi was not trying to attack anyone through his tafsir. He was actually interested in the tafsir of the verses themselves. He was interested in what these verses are saying. And whatever these verses are offering to him, from his perspective, of course, he actually writes them. And if they happen to rebut a concept that the Mu'tazila have, then he actually would rebut them. And if they happen to rebut what Abu Bakr says, Abu Bakr al-Asam, for example, says, then he would rebut them. If they happen to rebut the people of Taba'i', he would rebut them. Okay? But you don't see him targeting them or mentioning even them. In Ta'wilat, you hardly see Imam Maturidi mentioning a person, or from my work, of course. You hardly see him mentioning that particular person. At times, he will talk about some individuals, mushabbiha, like people would rise he and they as groups, but he does not target anyone. He sees what the verse, he analyzes the verse, and then he infers from it whatever he actually can. And one of the things that I loved about Imam Maturidi rahimahullah is that he did not bend verses to fit the concepts that he had. He actually flows with the verses. If he sees that ma'ruf should mean tawhid, he says yes. Ma'ruf, if ma'ruf means what people accept, then by extension should refer to what the mind accepts. And in his view, the mind accepts tawhid. The mind obligates tawhid. Yes.
Okay. So would you say that, I mean, the fact that he's written this work early 10th century, like we don't see any examples really from that era that brings that kind of analysis into exegesis or tafsir. Would you say that, Chaker?
Yeah, as far as what I did in the scope of ilahiyat, I can definitely see that we can. Well, that's my opinion. People do not have to accept it. I'll see him as the father of Sunni theological exegesis. I see him as the first one that wanted to write that genre. Okay, that we are going to address theology in tafsir, and it is okay for us to address theology in tafsir, and it is okay for us to move away from just listing in traditional exegetical reports, but to go further and analyze the actual verses, and to do that with a set methodology, to do that with principles. One of the things that I noticed when I was doing my the analysis of his commentary in Ta'wilat is that Imam Maturidi does not just raise topics for the sake of raising them. He even produces axioms, principles, and he actually follows them in his actual tafsir. So you can see a methodology or methodological approach in how he actually analyzes and interprets the verses that he sees relevant to theology.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aref. I'm familiar with your whole entire thesis, and I can say that your work has really revealed a comprehensive appreciation of Imam Maturidi's theology that I think it's never appeared in the literature until now. So we really look forward to publication to come out.
Thank you.
And when it comes out, we'll let everybody know. I guess so. I guess that's the end. Hakan, over to you. Is that the end of it? So we're over time, I think.
Yes, this is the end of the colloquium. Thank you so much for joining today. Thank you.
Hakan.
Fine, how about yourself? Thank you. Nice to listen to you. Thank you so much, Dr. Aref, Chaker, and Ikramullah Ahmed for presenting today in this research colloquium. Thank you for all of you for joining. Thank you, Dr. Mehmet and Zuleyha for chairing the sessions. Thank you, Professor Salim Farrar, Professor Yusel for their constructive feedback. And that will be those will be very helpful for Ikram. Thank you for all of you, and looking forward to having you next one, during the next colloquium, which will be held July. All right, we will start to advertise. Of course, you will receive announcement. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Have a good weekend. Bye bye.
Have a good weekend. Thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you.
Salam.
Salam.